Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Wolfram Language Design Review. A suspiciously short agenda here. Somehow the short ones end up not being the shortest. Um,
There's a good number of subsections also. I kind of cheated in condensing it. So both of these topics, I believe, actually came up in brief during the image processing and signal processing reviews. Um,
okay.
and the first topic is kind of a large one, which is we have a number of different systems or attempted systems in the language to try and annotate various things. So we have lots of wrappers that potentially need annotation, potentially some string objects, and we've had various methods of trying to do them in the past. And I think there's been
Yep.
a couple of discussions about we need a slightly more general system for how we
Yep.
approach annotation. And so I think there have been a couple of meetings in the past. I tried to kind of summarize the approaches that have been proposed. We have some instances of things where we have the annotations containerized very close to what they're annotating, things like text element or XML element, where we're very heavily nested. Um, we have other things where we try and have annotations either through options or through an extra wrapper function like annotated. And there's some benefits to each approach. It's a little bit tricky to have something that works holistically. There's some examples up a little higher of how Ian has attempted to do some things like using trees for annotating. So the trees section shows how annotations can be used by nesting trees together. So for example, yeah, XML element is something where we have annotation at a very granular level, and then we kind of nest them together to build a larger annotated object.
Hmm. I mean, by annotation, you mean this subvalue thing or what?
Right. Yeah. The
I mean, this
individual
is fairly
element.
grotesque, as we all
Yeah.
know.
Right. XML element is basically impossible to read at a glance. Um,
But now, is the tree version of it better?
so there's two versions of it there basically, and I've done the same thing with text structure, which is another thing. I think were it implemented today, it would probably naturally output a tree rather than
Yeah.
the nested text element version. But there's kind of two versions there with expression tree. One is maybe your more traditional sentence diagram, and the treefold version where it's actually you inserting the annotations on the nodes themselves.
Right. That is something, by the way, that we should look at is elements for text structure that actually give trees. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's other element we've talked about with quantity, for example. Oftentimes it's important to be able to annotate a quantity with a physical quantity that's associated with, or potentially have a physical quantity that has a quantity inserted inside of it. And we don't have a general framework for how that works on, you know,
All right. Let's
more.
take a look at these different cases.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's
Input
remind
form
ourselves
of.
what this actually looks like. I mean, the text structure thing is not completely stupid. And okay, I don't understand. I don't know what the input forms of these things are.
Yeah,
Text
they're
structure
all a
is
little
very
different.
similar to XML.
Yeah. This one is not a
What the
great.
heck is that?
This
That's
is a
garbage.
WFR function, but it's showing another case where it's potentially nice to be able to take something much more raw, like a string, and provide annotation without going straight into a
Yeah, I
more
mean, that's
deeply nested
ultimately a
case.
post annotation of some kind.
Right. That the way we'd probably do that is have an annotated string with some sort of information that says, these characters or these positions should be
All
highlighted
right.
in
So
this way.
look, here's what I think. I think all of these approaches to annotation are useful.
Hmm.
However, I think it's like expressions, like we have expand, we have factor, whatever else. What we need are some standardized functions for converting from one form to another. So, for example, the cat and the hat here. Let's say I had got it as a list of words and I've got wrapper type things indicating those highlights. I'd like to be able to convert it into a annotated string with a an option as a second argument.
We have a prototype for that in the proto build. You can do highlight string, and that will do exactly that. But there's some non-trivial stuff about how the front end renders boxes and new lines. So we started the
but you
design with
understand
my
design idea.
Yeah.
Rather than saying one of these approaches is better than the others, to just be able to interoperate them by having a bunch of translation functions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because ultimately the application changes which approach is better for you. You know, if you're working with strings, it's really nice to be able to keep them as ASCII strings or at least string expressions rather than something more complicated most of the time. But sometimes you may want text structure out of it, or you may want to turn it into a tree.
What do you propose? What are you saying, Julio? What was the thing?
If you just copy that thing and replace the head instead of highlight text with highlight string function. Oh, you have double brackets. Yeah. Surprised it was working in my proto.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see, this is
garbage.
No, it's not garbage. I mean, this is prototype, Stephen. But this is an annotated string. Yeah. So we cannot annotate a row object. So this is an object that stores the string and the annotation, and the job is actually done at typesetting. So this is not actually altering the structure of the object. It's just storing.
And the question is, do we want a function like annotated string, or do we want a general annotation wrapper that can annotate a bunch of different things? That's not obvious to me.
I don't think a general annotation wrapper can work in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, but I mean, some of these things like this. Let's look at some of the other cases.
Okay? We have annotation,
but I don't think it's worth having an annotated string. I think it needs a more general string object. That one of the things it can carry is annotations. Because all of these things lead to better workflows. Basically, that's the main thing that they do.
Yeah, the big problem with string is a raw object that you pass around. That I'm not sure that we can have a different string.
No,
without massively impacting performance.
We don't want a different. I mean, the issue is, what happens when you say string reverse on an annotated string? What happens when you do all of the string operations on annotated strings?
Oh, well, nothing. This is a prototype, and also this was but I see your point. But the thing is, this is what we called for images annotation calculus. Yeah, like if I add a bounding box and then I do an image reflect or an image take, some of them I might be able to propagate. Like image reflect, I could go inside and apply that transformation. Is well defined to all the annotations. But let's say that I do an image take.
How do we annotate images right now?
We don't.
We don't.
Right.
Okay.
There are prototypes in prototype or in one branch. I don't even think it's in prototype builds. Or we never finalized that.
Okay. So
but the way we annotate audio, which is the idea we wanted to use for images as well, was by using an annotation rules option in audio objects.
Right. Which we don't happen to be able to do with string because string is deeply raw.
Right.
But, it's not, we could also have a thing where we say something like, if all we were doing was string object or perhaps annotated string, I mean, we could imagine what are our raw objects. I mean, we could have an annotated byte array in principle.
I mean, at this point, the annotated head seems to make sense in the way that it could apply to any object.
I think an annotated byte array would be completely useless.
Why? I mean, it's like, here's the beginning of the this is a byte array that I got from an importer. Here's the beginning of the content. This is the header, blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's the most useful, but I don't think it's completely useless. I mean, okay, let's remind ourselves how graphs work with annotation.
I think possibly a good ref page to look at is Annotate. It has a lot of good and easy to understand annotation, graph annotation examples.
But we got rid of the thing that was just called property, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why it's listed here.
I mean, and by got rid, being renamed to annotation.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't behave drastically different from the old property.
Okay,
No.
okay. So this is the notion of annotate, which returns
the same object.
Yeah, I mean, this requires a structure object.
Right.
Because it needs to store.
What is that on the inside? What is that thing on the inside?
It either translates with the graph object with annotation rules, if you have special annotations.
Oh God.
Evaluate G.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Or in this case of graph, where we have edge style vertex labels that are quote unquote standard annotations, they end up in other options like what you have in there.
I can't read this.
Well, the thing you care about here is that you have this edge style.
Yep.
And undirected edge 1, 2 goes to RGB color. And this is because an edge style is already supported by graph, so it's end up just dumping it into the edge style.
Right. So in other words, this did the auto transformation of what was said that we said annotate. Actually, I don't use this functionality, but okay. So this is a quintessential example of something where this seems to be happening automatically.
Yeah, and then likewise, if you use wrappers on input when you create graph on vertices or edges, those get translated to annotations.
Okay, so let me understand that.
Under scope,
if I say graph of, 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 1, 1 goes to 2, and now can I put on this style of 2, red or something?
Probably not there, but in the vertex list you could do that. You could definitely do style on the edge in the edge list, but you can't style the vertex in the edge list.
No, well, yeah, the problem is that those are two different vertices at this point. Yeah, but if you in the vertex
list, which you didn't give, this should work.
Yeah.
And if you now had a vertex list like 1, 2, you could style the two vertex with a wrapper.
Yeah,
but if you look at the input form of that, it still stores them separately. See?
I see.
Because when you compute on this graph,
I know you don't want to care about the edge style.
Yeah, you don't want an RGB color hanging around on your edge.
Right. So it's the same type of thing as if I say, X, 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 and I color that X, green, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So those X's are all the same. That's a styling annotation purely in the front end. Now, we could imagine, we could imagine something that was an annotated X that was green, where the evaluator specifically doesn't care about the annotated part. I mean, that's a bit dangerous.
Yeah, I don't think that's a workable.
It's one of those things where it's like angels, immovable forces. What's the length of the thing? Well, is it 1 or is it 2 type thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, I should be using annotate more seriously. Okay, so now talk to me about annotation rules. So that's annotate.
Now, if you scroll down to scope and then open maybe vertex annotations. The beginning examples are just those standard annotations. There should be a last example in that section that says add a
That's why there
custom.
aren't separators here in our documentation style. Anyway, minor point. Roger, do you understand? Agree? Oh, no,
Probably
Yeah,
because
when
this
there-
is one
when
big
there's-
example that reuses G.
Yeah,
we
if you
shouldn't do
have-
that. Shouldn't do that. Should just have that graph be
Oh,
stuck
that's
in here or
just
something
because
like
the
that.
copy paste rules on the web are so funky. But go down so you can see a custom annotation. So all these are standard annotations.
Mhm.
Let's see.
That last one, set a custom annotation.
Where? Oh, there it is. Okay.
Material goes to wood.
Okay, and that's stored in annotation rules, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And where, to indicate where for graphs, we have a way to give vertices and a way to give edges. Those are the possible wheres, and the whole object as well.
Right.
Now, for other objects, the where is different, like for audio.
Yeah. Sure.
It's either a timestamp, a one time or a time interval.
Right.
For regions, it's again different.
And for image, it would be again different.
Yep.
Okay, so why does this annotate function not work on audio?
It does.
Why isn't it documented then?
I think there might be tentative examples that I forgot to untentative. I'll look at it.
Okay.
So I think whenever we have an object that's not absolutely minimal, we can build these. It's sort of not super hard to do to include annotations. Like an image is a
What
more
about graphics?
Graphics is a little bit complicated because it's not. I mean, we would have to think about that for a sec.
Well, you didn't put this in, so this is not adequate. Okay.
Audio annotate function should have examples. I can just port them from there.
Well, why is there a separate audio annotate?
That has automation inside, yeah. That is the one that is
This is the
done
one
by
that
property.
has presets, right? If you open details.
And annotate is neutral. You have to write manually what you want to annotate with what. This thing here knows about audio and can basically create the annotations for you.
And then for images, it would be.
And in principle,
detected.
I just realized a cool use case if we line up the workflow. So you know this new speech to text whisper thing.
Yep.
We know the time intervals for where the sentences are said.
Yep.
So in principle, we could add the actual text as annotation to an audio, and it would be an annotated audio if you like.
Yeah, which would be good.
And then where this topic again came up in
Now we can do
Sound and
karaoke.
Vision.
Yeah, we could also do bounding boxes, presumably in
exactly in an image.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is the workflow. I mean, this is a typical radiologist or dermatologist workflow, right?
Yeah, right. But so look, what we need here, presumably, is generic annotation rules and then specialized things like how do we indicate highlighted regions in an image? We have highlight image, right?
Exactly.
Which today produces graphics. So would be really good if that actually was, an image. I think we just need to work at it more, and we'll be able to do that.
So okay, so the idea would be, yeah, that's kind of wrong. Presumably.
Yeah, I mean, I changed this like many years ago, simply because it used to, in the first version, was just an image.
No, I understand.
But that was terrible because it would rasterize lines and stuff like that.
Right. So really what it should be there is an image, wherever we had that. Well, I don't know where we have that. Okay, it should be an image with, I don't know, highlighted regions or something.
Why not annotation rules?
I mean, I think
Well,
annotation
well,
rules can be even more general, right? Than
Yeah. What I
So
was thinking is that there's a specialized thing here, just like you say edge styles. There's a thing that has an immediate meaning to the image object, whereas annotation rules is just a carrier that you can have anything in that won't be interpreted by image.
Yeah, this is very important, I think, because an highlight image could produce that new rule. And my reasoning is as following: like, let's say that you want to annotate images with a bunch of things, you want to store them, but displaying all of them is going to be messy. So the highlight image could have a fast syntax that looks at the annotation rules and just you highlight, you promote to highlighting one of the annotations, like the
Sure.
cat bounding boxes.
Right. And then highlighting rules will be a thing that actually renders, just like edge styles actually renders.
That's going to be like epilogue. Like the model is epilogue for
Yes,
plots.
no, I understand.
Or,
I understand.
or graphics. Yeah.
Right. It's an overlay, highlighting rules overlay that would be things like, well, I don't know whether it would either be a bounding box or it might be, hopefully we're going to get shapes other than, some shape.
Well, in principle, you can have everything, but if you go back to the highlight image,
it has a little bit richer.
That we have points.
Points.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have like any 2D geometric region,
or
label metrics.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so all of those things will be parts left-hand side of highlighting rules.
Right.
Ideally, yes.
What do you get when you export it to a file? Does it drop the highlighting rules or does it rasterize?
Yeah, almost no format supports if you have annotation rules, they will be dropped.
No, but there has to be an export element. It has to be an export. It has to be an export option.
Mm-hmm.
What to do with these? And I would say most of the time, right. Most of the time, we would want to include them and rasterize them. I think it'd be infuriating to have an image that you've carefully annotated and you export it for something and it's high enough resolution, doesn't matter about the raster artifacts, and you suddenly your beautiful annotations that you put all this effort into just disappear.
We can use the rule. Sorry, Charlie, please.
I would say we can. It's easier to opt into that rasterization by just calling rasterize of an image and expect all of those highlightings get rasterized into an image and then export, or with an option like include annotations. Yeah,
which should by default be true.
I also have a feeling that it should. In a sense, that is what you look at. Yeah, the image object displays
by default, and people can set it off if they don't want that. Okay.
Also, stuff is not going to be highlighted by default. Yeah, if you annotate it, you need to highlight it. So
that's a good point.
Right. So okay. So let's take a look now at in this model. So audio, how does it do its annotations? How does it represent an annotated audio?
It's always in the annotation rules. And again, the where is a single time or a time interval. The what can be anything.
Okay, but there you're putting it in annotation rules. Whereas what we're saying is things that actually take action on the object should be in some specialized option, if that makes sense. Right, the annotation rules is a generalized carrier that...
there's one distinction here that we noticed while looking at this for like tree graphics versus image and audio. The first group is built up of separate items, while image and audio, they are ideally a continuous region that you sample, either by pixel or by sample rate. So annotations for image and audio live in this real
Yeah, I
space.
understand. I mean, look, you could in principle imagine image data. You get that image data and you start spraying style of blah, red onto the points in the image data.
That's true, but then you'll be limiting yourself because you will be back to rasterizing your annotation. You can imagine that, but I don't think it's the right mental model for image annotation.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah, okay. I don't use that as much as I should. Okay, so let's keep going here. So now we've got text structure and we've got strings. And I have to say, I am in favor of an annotated string construct. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think with anything low level.
I think that you should think more general, Stephen. Because like the string object you had, I think it's a better idea with annotation in, and then it's sort of future-proofing it for other things that we might want to do.
Or an extended string or something.
Something, but even if we just brainstorm half an hour or something, we would come up with more things that would be nice for sort of a text/string workflow.
Look at this. That's head string. It's kind of interesting.
That's very, I mean, extending string in that way is very dangerous.
Okay. Viewed as insane.
There are lots of functions that are just looking for like underscore string and not checking string queue.
Right, and they would all break if we did this.
Okay.
Which would be a great way to fix all those functions.
Yeah. I don't think this is the right thing. Okay.
All right, I volunteer you, Giulio, to go and fix all of 30 years of formatting code to do this.
Yep, of course.
Yeah, that's what we should spend.
Okay, right, okay. Let's keep going here. So text structure.
But that means too that could be other annotation, not just highlighting.
For a string.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I agree, but that's what this is doing as well.
Right, exactly.
That's what text structure is doing, and maybe we shouldn't confuse it and say it's a string, but rather say it's a piece of text. Maybe not. Maybe that's wrong.
I mean, the reason why I don't like text structure is because text structure is doing in input form what annotated string is doing in typesetting. So the input form of that is basically XML. That means that it's very cumbersome to go back to the string.
Hold on. What we're saying is, okay, remember my general principle at the beginning. We've got several different ways of doing annotation, from nested symbolic wrappers to options to whatever else. My initial comment was that we should have ways to convert between them. So for example, this thing here, we could in principle turn this into an annotation rules option to something, which will be convenient for some purposes and not for others. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So
I mean,
today, does string operation work on text structure? I mean, like if I do string length, does that work?
No, I don't think it does.
On text structure.
No. And this is an end of a computation. I mean, this is display basically.
Right. Okay. So
not only just display, because I mean this is actually like XML, so you can do pattern matching and operations like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I get it.
Let's review a couple of things. Okay. So image and audio and things like that are, as you say, special because they have things that are sort of a blob that can't be broken apart. They do not have the possibility of in-place symbolic wrappers, right? Whereas some of these other things do have in-place symbolic wrappers, like text structure has an in-place symbolic wrapper. So does, what are the other ones that have in-place symbolic wrappers?
Well, graph and mesh
tree,
graphics,
mesh region,
mesh
boundary mesh region,
which are not listed here for some reason.
I would include notebook and XML.
Well, I don't know to what extent notebook and cell and so on have the ability to have symbolic wrappers.
I don't think they do.
Well, I'm sorry.
I think they
don't
they are
entirely
the
understand the
symbolic
question.
wrappers.
Okay, so here's the question. Question is this: in for example, in list plot, we have the possibility of having symbolic wrappers that say, if I say, for example, here, if I say list plot of 1 style 2 red 3, I get that.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
out or labeled.
Yeah. But so the way that works, which we sort of introduced in for charting 7, is that there is a parser that sits on front and strips them and creates a structure.
I mean, this is very nice. It's very nice. And the alternative here of
for
saying,
small things, this is super nice, I think.
What's that?
For small things, this is super nice. For big data, no.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. So what we need here is we don't have for list plot a way of saying here, we could imagine something which just says, 2, wherever it is, and then here we could say, let me make that 7 or something, just so we clarify what's going on. We could say something like, not annotation rules, but something like labeling rules or something. That's not quite the right term. I don't know what it is. Annotation rules, whatever it is. Annotation.
Right. No, but the specification from afar, basically.
Yeah, annotation labeling goes to blah blah blah. Element 2 goes to blah blah blah. Or it could be by coordinates. I don't know how that would be done. But this would then be, so the question is, let's say we've got these two things. So in the case of graph, you're moving things like this out into the, because graph is a computational object, you're moving these things out into the sort of styling options.
Right.
Right.
Effectively, for actual implementation purposes, we are doing the same for all these visualization functions. So there's a front end that moves them away.
Okay, what is it? So you have internal options that are the equivalent of my annotation labeling option.
Well, we call it a parser.
No, I understand, but you are
very efficient to strip them and remember where they are, because they're going to be reapplied towards the end.
I get it. I get
it.
Right,
but they're stored in edge style, right? They're not, right? There's
no,
but not the list plot.
No. It's completely internal description. There's nothing.
I thought he was talking about graph.
No, I wasn't. I was talking about list plot. So Roger was talking about list plot, and what Roger is saying is that internal to list plot, what's happening is something which could be revealed to users like this.
Yeah, I mean, it would be complicated because we allow at so many levels, but yeah, absolutely, we would have to.
Right, you have to have a way of specifying the left-hand side here. Just like in audio, it's just like an interval or something like this.
Exactly.
But here there would have to be a language that represents what subpart of this we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right.
I think, I mean, so I think it's more useful in list plot, right, for having a way of, representing data series, styling for the different series than individual points.
Well, it might be an individual point. I don't think that we can say that for sure.
I mean, also, the future of sort of visualization is typically to have many more dimensions, and you often have kind of some property being, like if you think tabular in some outer column, right? Sex.
Does that work? No, that didn't work. But that's the kind of thing we're doing. That will be action at a distance. That will be the analog of the edge style.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, but
right. Also,
plot style is positional, right? If you did if you wrap the red and the green in lists, then you would get that.
Well, no, I mean, if I didn't say the one arrow, the sparse representation, I just used a dense representation here. Presumably, I would just get what I want there. Yeah.
Yeah, but also a sort of a future way of doing this for plotting and so on is to have basically more columns of data. So you have higher dimensional data, and you read off some other property that you want to map to maybe color, maybe a label, maybe shape.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like sex.
Yes, but that's probably a super function to list plot. I mean, that's not probably list plot itself. Or no, actually, what it probably is a list plot with a visualizer or something of data, comma, slice there.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Maybe not to proceed too much on this today because we are.
Okay. But I mean, just to get a sense. So this is another example. The plotting functions are another example.
You can wrap that 7 in style of black and make it black, right?
For which one?
In of 114.
Yeah, I could say here style of this, comma, large, I suspect. No, that didn't work. Why didn't that work?
Probably point size large or something. Point size.
Okay, wait. I could say black here. Okay. Okay. So there are these sort of, as you said, there are these things that are, in-place wrappers. There are action at a distance things. You're calling them in-content wrappers. I agree. I mean, the two things we know here are in-content wrappers and referent options, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, is there another?
An external wrapper was kind of what I was calling the third category, which is just trying to have, like we were talking about, a super function like we have with annotated, but that implementationally basically goes into the second option.
Right. So I think we have that function, which is annotate.
Right. Yeah.
And annotate, an interesting possibility for even list plot is to be able to say annotate. I mean, so a question there would be annotate. Oh my gosh, a list 1, 2, 3, and then we say 2 arrow. I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't know what that doesn't really make any sense. What the heck is that message text not found? Well, bug. Why doesn't QA automatically find all of these message text not founds?
Because you don't know what messages will be issued short of managing to trigger all of them.
But can't you just look up in the source code every place where a message is called for and look at what its tag is?
But this excludes you. I mean, most of us use helper functions to create messages, so it's not entirely
you
obvious.
can look for the tag. You can look for where the tag goes.
It's also
anyway.
No, yeah, but if I have
also don't forget most messages don't actually appear in the message list because they're attached to general.
Okay. Anyway, I'm just saying, can somebody please feed this to Stefan and just comment that? I mean, this is a specific bug, but just make the suggestion that we have a general way to do this.
I have passed it along.
Okay. All right. So let's come back here. Let's just do a quick survey of the different cases here, right? And how we like or don't like what's been done. Okay. Text structure is really going to town on the nesting of in-context wrappers. And the whole point is we need a way to, I mean, I would imagine something like, it's like, I don't know whether it's flatten annotations or something. I don't know whether that's quite the right thing, but
it's a case where the annotation rules would be fairly complicated because there's multiple levels spanning. I think that having some system to do the transformation definitely makes sense, but
right, and it probably needs to be a somewhat controlled translation.
Yeah.
Maybe the correct thing is 2 annotation rules or some such other thing. Does this make sense? I mean, so this is, and then, it will be like from annotation rules.
So there's no where with text element, or it's implicit because it comes from the nesting of text elements.
No, it has to be constructed. I mean, the where has to be constructed out of, what it would be in the end is in the end, it would be something, I would guess, that one thing is a nested text element, and the other would be something like, maybe this is wrong, a single text element with a very nested set of annotation rules. You see what I'm saying? One level text element. It's like a flatten.
That first argument would basically just be a string.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so.
Yeah, I mean, the other case I was thinking of that is sometimes nice for annotation of strings is things like, we were talking about with the linguistics functions of sometimes I have a string and it is IPA data. And just looking at it, it might be an ASCII string or it might be a Unicode string, but unless something is telling like the audio system, this is IPA data, so you need to handle it as such, it just gets treated as a generic string. And that may fall into a more general, annotated string or.
But I think that's exactly another thing that string objects could gradually, as we accumulate workflows / use cases, that's the kind of thing that can absorb.
Carry character encoding or other things too.
Yeah.
Sorry, say that again. I got distracted here for a second.
Yeah, we were just saying, rather than, there may be a case where rather than this being a text element with a string and then a bunch of annotation rules, having a string object where you could say something like, this is IPA data, this is a string encoded with this character encoding, here are annotations, and combine all 3 of them.
Right. And arguably, yeah, I mean, so I don't know whether we can have something which is a general way of untangling sort of in context annotations, or whether it'll be specific. But let's just look at other cases where, so I mean, I think I don't think we should be attacking the text element mechanism. I think the text element mechanism is perfectly fine. It's just not always what you want. Do you agree?
Yeah, once you have a text structure, there's not a lot you can do with it because it's highly nested, but you can do things like turn it into a tree.
Sure.
But if you just
I think it's, yeah, go ahead.
And say if you have a text structure as your starting point, it's hard to go back to a string. Having some sort of way to decouple the annotations and get the underlying string might be nice.
Right. I mean, so this is an untangling. I mean, the same thing is probably true of XML. That being able to just go through and cut all the garbage and just get the basic, sequential elements from the bottom of the tree, which would be presumably a tree map thing. How do you get the elements? Tree leaves, right?
Yeah.
So if I said of this, if I get the expression tree here, and then I say to this expression tree, it's a bit crazy. What the hell is it doing with it? Why is it formatting like this?
Those are XML object options, which are different from the elements. There's a declaration at the beginning of the, you have an XML object document, XML object declaration.
If this was a piece of HTML, would I be able to read the plain text here?
In many
From the-
cases, yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm looking for. And I don't understand why there's big empty space around these things. What's the reason for that?
That's how Graph lays out things currently. I'm working on tidy tree visualizations that'll help with that.
Okay. All right. Okay, fine. Okay. But then, so for trees, what is the annotation mechanism for trees?
There isn't one. Last time we talked about this metadata annotations things for trees specifically, we talked about having a payload wrapper that you can put inside nodes and put the annotations in there.
But I thought, okay, but I mean, we have the payload is the first argument of the tree object.
Yeah, so and this was just a suggested name, but it would be like a capital P payload of, and you'd have the data, but then you could have metadata as options there.
All right, so that is an in-context wrapper type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which may or may not be the correct thing to do. Because the alternative would just be to have an option of which we have many in the tree objects, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that for the nested kinds of objects, there's some benefits to having the annotations close to.
Well, but then I think
where
we
they're
want
stored.
a generic annotation wrapper, which we don't currently have, do we? I mean, what?
It's a front-end thing. If you go to annotation page, it's a very vintage function that disappears in typesetting.
Vintage 2007. Yes, I mean, we might be able to enhance this.
Stephen, can you open the source ref page for payload?
And if you see the annotation page, this is the same essentially as the usage.
I think it's almost the same. I mean, I think we could just use annotation for this.
Well, annotation, maybe with some extensions.
Yeah.
Like multiple
right.
rules.
I mean, a modernized annotation.
And I think the last usage is already remodernized. As you can see, it is eaten by graph and mesh.
That was the new addition in annotation, yes.
I see. Well, that's exactly what should be being done in tree. Right, so annotation is the generic, so annotation rules is the generic option at a distance type mechanism, and annotation is the generic in-place wrapper mechanism, correct?
I think so, yeah.
So there are specialized versions of that as well, like style or something like this, but that's the generic way to do it. So what we need is something that goes between the annotation mechanism and the annotation rules mechanism, right? We need something which for every one of these functions will try and move from one to the other. Now, does graph, for example, accept annotation as, yes, it says it does. So, I mean, we're going to have to wrap for right now here, but this is a good discussion. I think we're making good progress. I do think some of the ones we haven't discussed yet, I mean, quantity, I would have thought we should just have the possibility of an annotation rules option inside the quantity object. Am I making sense?
Yeah, we potentially can. There's a bit of a question about, whether the physical quantity has an annotation that is a quantity or the quantity has an annotation that's physical quantity. But that's something Michael has strong opinions
Yeah,
about.
okay.
And we'll
Well,
bring
we
him in.
yes, we should deal with that. But I mean, okay, for notebooks and cells, one of the issues there is, I mean, we really need to have a look at notebook programming, which is like, it's older than many of the people working on it.
Yes.
And it was done at a time when, I mean, a lot of things there are not as symbolic as they could be.
So I have a question about, so you said we have the in-place annotation and the action at the distance annotation, where the current proposal for the latter is the annotation rules option.
No, I would say that's the generic, but
Yeah.
many functions will have a thing. I mean, the annotation rules option is just a carrier.
Sure.
That most of the time will not actually do anything.
But the idea is to have something within the object structure itself rather than...
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I was wondering, does it make sense at all to have the wrapper live outside the object like annotation does and perform in a similar way? So it doesn't...
That's your third case. Right. I agree. Yes, I think it does. I think that there is a case. Look, what we've got is annotate that drills, right? Annotate actively drills and sticks things in places in annotation rules, for example, or in edge style or whatever else it is. Annotation can be a hang around outside and have an effect on the inside, or be inside. Okay, so the question is could there be something which is not like annotate, which drills things into the inside, but is a wrapper on the outside, the IC?
I think that's what Giulio had in his prototype for annotated. I don't remember the exact name, but the one you checked in prototype.
The string, you mean?
So that's what I had in mind, something that acts, does something on the typesetting level, but is stored in a separate way, not within the object itself. That seems to me like the complete analog of annotation rules, but without having the need of throwing stuff inside objects themselves.
Right, and then it's an externalized thing which could also work for things like string and integer and so on.
Yeah, and the advantage of that is, sure, we need to teach the functions that eat that kind of object to ignore and potentially propagate the annotation wrapper, the annotated wrapper. But at the same time, it makes it clearer where the annotation lives and where it doesn't, which makes the whole export issue a bit clearer in my mind as well.
Well, you're
I think something
annotated.
always goes wrong when you split them. If you
it would be a single object, right? It would be an annotated object that you carry around without doing without having them separate. I'm just saying.
To be clear, what we're saying, and we really need to go in a second here, but what we're saying is there is annotation, which is an internal. That's the case of, in place wrapper. There is annotation rules, which is, option inside structure. And there is annotated, which is externalized annotation.
Yeah, I would say a completely equivalent to annotation rules, just it lives in a different place.
Well, it lives outside the object.
Yep.
This could have annotation rules in it, or it could have other kinds of annotations in it. Now, annotate is a driller, drills the annotations, plants the annotations inside Expo. Am I making sense?
Yep.
And I guess if it can't, in the case that there is a string,
then it puts it and it writes annotated.
Yep.
And the issue is So arguably, we could make annotated with one argument, pull out annotation rules. I think that's probably not a particularly good idea. I kind of think that
So if I'm guessing, what triggered today's meeting was text and trees. Is that right? Or
Segmentation.
oh,
Image
Segmentation
segmentation.
object was the impetus.
okay, this is pull out annotations as an option. Now, I mean, it could be that that thing is actually this that just returns the options.
In audio, we do have audio annotation lookup. It's a lookup function.
What does it do?
Is it
That
like
you can-
annotation value? Sorry.
Yeah, more or less.
What's
Has a-
annotation value? So we haven't discussed that, have we?
That already exists, and it was
know.
for graph, right? That was where that. It's the rename property value.
Right.
And I have to say, it's not always very convenient due to having to take the object as an argument. It'd be nice if the processing functions could just semantically deal with annotations.
Let's talk about annotation value another time.
Yeah.
Okay. But so these are the, I mean, it's that's not a comment. That is a syntax we could use for something. Okay. In any case. Okay. Well, we've opened this topic. We have not closed it. I think we'll need another hour or so at least to talk about it. By the way, this doesn't seem completely. Oh. Yeah. This poll business.
Yep.
I-
In 30
I
seconds.
have not seen this before. I think
Yeah, this also came up in the signal processing
All right.
review, but yeah.
I'd
30
like
second
them to be
version
in
is, I think we
WDR,
can.
but that's okay. We'll discuss that.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thanks.